Ladies and gentlemen, if anybody ever asks you, well, why did H.A. Goodman go from Bernie Sanders to Trump? The reason is the following. I am going to vote against any political party that has Bush-era Republicans. In this case, the Lincoln Project and other similar organizations. You have the early 2000s Republicans who are now never Trumpers. Okay, President Trump is an intriguing, very unique president, politician in American history. He doesn't really fit a certain mold. He's not a traditional Republican, which is why there's a direct line between Bernie Sanders and President Trump. President Trump has been against, and always against, never-ending counterinsurgency conflicts. I have written against never-ending counterinsurgency conflicts in The Hill, the Huffington Post, the Jerusalem Post, the Roanoke Times. That is in my website, hagoodman.com. Go to hagoodman.com. There's a section where I explain, where there's published articles in these publications from yours truly, where I oppose never-ending counterinsurgency conflicts where we send Americans off and try to impose a political reality through military force. It is the most immoral thing we can do to the men and women that just we owe a lot better to. The men and women of the United States military should not be utilized in such a manner. We're the most powerful country in the world, yet there are things still that we cannot do. Okay? We should have learned from the French in Vietnam, and we should have learned from the lessons of Vietnam. We should have learned from the Soviets in Afghanistan. We should have learned, but we didn't learn. We didn't learn the lessons of history. And I don't want Americans to be stuck in quagmires. It is the most immoral thing for a country to do, to send men and women off into theaters of conflict that you know there's just no end in sight. You don't have the adversary is invisible. You're trying to get the hearts and minds of people through military force. It's not going to work. There are political realities that people in other countries simply don't want. That don't, it's impossible to force our political interests upon others. Or at least this is not Germany and Japan. So people say, well, we've been in Germany and Japan. No, that's not the case. So we owe the men and women of the United States military a lot better. We owe them a president like Trump who opposed regime change, military interventions. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. We're on our way back to 200,000 subscribers. Lincoln Project is being obliterated. The Bush era, there's a scandal now. They all knew about it. Everyone's talking about it now. And you can just type in Lincoln Project. Even the New York Magazine, The Predator and the Lincoln Project, New York Times, now all the publications, AP News, how a leading anti-Trump group ignored a crisis in its ranks. It was allowed to do so. The media and the Democratic Party will allow anyone, no matter how nefarious, they'll elevate that group or that person's voice simply to harm or to hurt President Trump. So, and this is ahead of certain acquittal. So hit subscribe right now from the impeachment. But think of the cost on American families. Hundreds of thousands of traumatic brain injuries. Okay, by one estimate, there's 400,000 traumatic brain injuries. There's been, of the 2.5 million Americans who've served in the past 20 years in these theaters of conflict, but over 1 million have been injured in some manner, from hearing loss to back and knee issues to much worse. There are people who have had amputations, PTSD in the hundreds of thousands. So the cost has been tremendous, just like with any war. And you now have the children of American veterans serving in the same countries. It was President Trump who officially ended the war in Afghanistan. Biden or Clinton would have made things infinitely worse. She wanted a no-fly zone above Damascus. Do the math there. That's like Top Gun 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's, people talk about climate change and the end of the planet. Those are serious issues. You want to end the planet quickly? Put a no-fly zone above Damascus. See what happens with Russian jets above. This isn't Facebook ads. Apoplectic, morally superior liberals. You're looking at all these militaries stuck in one region of the world that's a powder keg. Where have we seen that before? But we haven't seen it with nuclear weapons. So you had thousands and thousands of Americans who've lost their lives. You have the hundreds of thousands of people who've lost their lives from regime changes and interventions that left a power vacuum and that caused or set the stage for civil wars and conflicts, where we're stuck in between two factions or three or four vying for control of a country that we helped destabilize inadvertently with foreign policy from smart power from President Obama in Libya and, of course, the neoconservative Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld people. There's nothing that President Trump has done that's worse than what Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld did to this world, this country, and to the Middle East, and to other countries. There's nothing. You are an ignorant human being if you say that Trump was worse than George W. Bush. You lack knowledge of the devastating, catastrophic, complete disaster of a foreign policy linked directly to Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld. Their decisions left the world in turmoil. Their decisions negatively impacted the lives of millions upon millions of people. And if you want to say, WMD and the intelligence operatives, that's okay. Look, Bay of Pigs. Go look at the history of the wonderful intelligence community. I love when they say community. It's like, what do you think? Like, James Comey's mowing his lawn, and James Clapper's riding his bike. Hi, neighbor. And John Brennan is like, changing the oil in his car. Oh, hey, everybody, it's a community. These are people who whether it's Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld, or President Obama with Libya, just turning that country into a failed state, there's nothing that Trump has done as devastating to those countries and to the world as what President Obama did in Libya and Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld did in numerous countries. And it was all predicated upon the most horrendous intelligence. It's actually it's the opposite of the meaning of the word. So the irony is so hilarious. It's not hilarious. It's sad. It's unfortunate, because all you have to do is say, well, intelligence says, and then the people who want a certain course of action will say, you see, intelligence says. What's the problem? It's not intelligence. It's ignorance. They should rename the community to Ignorance Says. The ignorant community, not the intelligence community. But I'm going to oppose never-ending wars. Okay? That's more important than what a person says on Twitter or cyber reality. And I mean, you want to just really quickly. I'm not offended by I mean what Gina Carano said. I'm not like it's an unfortunate analogy, but you want to compare the Gina Carano controversy now to what AOC did? Yad Vashem refuted and condemned AOC's complete revisionist history. There is no precedent for this. Yad Vashem in Jerusalem saying, learn more about the topic. She tried to compare what took place in the southern border, where it was Biden and President Obama who deported more human beings utilizing those locations than any president ever. And, I mean, I can't even get into it because of YouTube policies. There's a Senate report that's worse than anything President Trump presided over. And the family separation was wrong. He ended that in June of 2018. Democrats never got the memo. But what President Obama did with the Senate report, what happened there, I can't even discuss. It's worse than anything President Trump presided over. But it wasn't Gina Carano or anyone else who tried to revise history. An analogy, a hurtful or offensive analogy, is different from trying to engage in revisionist history, trying to equate two time periods that have nothing in common. There is zero in common with what's taking place in those locations that AOC looked into, stared into in that famous photo where you're not seeing what she's looking at. There's a reason for that. It's pure propaganda. There's a reason that Yad Vashem had to refute what she said, because it was a very dangerous and manipulative and deceptive form of propaganda, utilizing the pain and suffering and the loss of life of millions upon millions that I can't even talk about on YouTube. And you're going to compare. So why doesn't AOC, why wasn't she kicked out of Congress for making that absurd and dangerous and very insulting, very offensive, infinitely more offensive than what Gina Carano said? Which, by the way, like, she shouldn't be. See, this is the thing. They utilize outrage for their own purposes. When it's true outrage, Yad Vashem actually going and saying, hey, AOC, you're wrong. And they're not a political organization. They could have been much more direct and to the point, saying, look, what you're engaging in is revisionist history. But I have to speak in roundabout terms now. AOC equated the most barbaric time in world history to what's taking place with America's immigration system. And that's revision. That's the most dangerous form of revisionist history. But anyway, where you got Yad Vashem in Jerusalem to condemn and refute those remarks, that didn't happen with Gina Carano. But see, again, an unfortunate or offensive analogy, which, by the way, Democrats have used all the time when calling Trump the 1930s and 1940s Trump supporters, Trump himself, likening President Trump and his political movements the 1930s and 1940s Germans. That's an offensive analogy. That shouldn't be allowed. But you get mad at Gina Carano? For what? When you're okay with AOC? And I wrote about AOC in the Jerusalem Post. Read that article, where I can explain exactly what my vantage point is without, speaking in roundabout terms because of the YouTube algorithm. But AOC was refuted by Yad Vashem, Nobody else has been refuted by Yad Vashem. That says something. That is truly offensive, what AOC said. And it's dangerous, and it's revisionist history. And it's denial. What AOC did was denial. But anyway, Democrats will utilize outrage. They have the platform. They have the ability to do so, to deflect. So now they focus on utilize it to deflect from their own sins and to pretend they're morally superior, which they're not. In many cases, Democrats are morally inferior. Allowing the Lincoln Project within. So Gina Carano shouldn't have been. If Gina Carano is fired, AOC should have been kicked out of Congress for the absurd correlation or metaphor or analogy that she used. But the really revisionist denial type of analogy. And I wrote about that in the Jerusalem Post. That's on my website. But what I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, is that you've had real issues swept under the rug. You have a true danger to the world in George W. Bush's foreign policy and President Obama's foreign policy in Libya as simply, shrug shoulders, that's what happens. That's what happens. So whenever you hear from the foreign policy experts that despise Trump, I read foreign affairs and foreign policy, all these foreign policy publications. Okay, they're very interesting. They used to be a lot more accurate, or not accurate, but they used to be much more intriguing before President Trump's administration, because they have a real tough time giving Trump credit for all the amazing things, from the Abraham Accords to peace, the beginning of peace between North and South Korea, things that Trump presided over, that they just can't give him credit for. But you look at them and you can look at, there's one article, President Obama's well-meaning intervention turned into failure. It's a well-meaning intervention. There are now human beings being bought and sold now in Libya. It's a well-meaning intervention. I mean, it's well-meaning. Oh, really? Why? Well, Democrat. It's fine. Oh, it's well-meaning. And then when you get people defending Bush, it's, intelligence reports said he wasn't lying. What? Intelligence reports told him that about WMD, and so he wasn't lying there? So what? Intelligence reports that's meaningless. You can say intelligence says this, intelligence says that. Okay, well, the intelligence could be wrong. It's the opinion of a bunch of people. You had the smartest, most educated people getting us into Vietnam. In fact, they had a series of war games that foreshadowed exactly what took place before we went in, saying, we couldn't win. You always have the most intelligent people, the most educated people with the best universities and degrees getting us into these never-ending and horrible conflicts, and then they just shrug their shoulders. Then you have President Trump, who is like the Grinch who stole Christmas to these people, and oh my God, his tweets. And oh my God, he's directly responsible for compelling and telling people what to do, and they're not getting him in a court of law. But if he's directly responsible for the Capitol, are the Lincoln Project people and the associated organizations of Bush-era neoconservatives, are they directly responsible for all the cases of PTSD and all the traumatic brain injuries and all the lives lost in the United States of America because of their words, their advocacy, their foreign policy vision? What moral and legal repercussion, or what moral, is there a direct link legally and morally to Bush and all the chaos and suffering and sorrow that he's caused? What about President Obama in Libya? I noticed that there are New York Times journalists and others, Washington Post and other, this, George Washington or Thomas Jefferson. Okay, they're viewed now. They're viewed in a certain light, where any other accomplishment is diminished or erased because of horrendous activity they were a part of. One of the worst in human history, if not the worst. So President Obama presided over a NATO intervention where human beings now are being bought and sold in Libya because of President Obama's administration. And that's not just my words. Those are articles. There's a USA Today article which blames Hillary Clinton, but it's actually President Obama who should be blamed also. Even more so directly. He was president. Can't just blame the Secretary of State. How is he absolved? And I'm actually sticking up for Hillary Clinton. It's just funny. There are human beings being bought and sold now in Libya. So do you judge President Obama by that? Are all his other accomplishments or his importance as president completely erased because of his foreign policy? What about the lives, the suffering that he caused in Syria by funding rebels, which was a surreptitious regime change? But in Libya, they haven't had a moment of peace since the NATO intervention. How anyone could say that, that the intervention didn't save anyone. It caused 10 years of chaos and mayhem and civil unrest and civil war, and where human beings are being bought and sold. These are articles. The CNN even talked about it. So is that directly President Obama's fault? Should he be judged only by that consequence? I don't know. If now the standard has changed for American presidents, how does President Obama circumvent that standard of judgment? Well, liberals don't apply the same standards they apply to others to themselves. We know that. But anyway, give me your thoughts below. President Trump has presided over victories now that he doesn't even know he's being victorious. He probably, the Lincoln Project is done, which is really interesting because the most unsavory people are utilized to go after President Trump, and then you see all the skeletons in their closet. There's like a litany of people that have tried to go after Trump, and it just never works out for them. Because you notice something, President Trump isn't like this, saintly individual. He's got a lot of rough edges, but he's not nearly as bad as even the President of the United States, Biden. Trump never had a criminal report by an accuser. Biden did. And with the hot mic is different from actually being accused of that specific thing. And that's very difficult in the minds of liberals also. They got so worked up over a hot mic in which nobody had ever accused him of what he said. And they couldn't reprogram their brains to realize that Tara Reid literally accused Biden of that thing. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. Trump obliterates the Lincoln Project. And he's heading for certain acquittal. You're not going to get 17 Republicans to convict President Trump. And what took place was horrendous. But Trump did not direct anyone. He didn't direct or tell anyone to do anything.